Hi, welcome to Dad Surviving Divorce. I'm Dwayne, and today's topic is going to be, is it really cheaper to keep her? On this channel, we talk about toxic divorces, parenting tips to help your children, techniques to help you cope through the craziness of this all, and ways to build a better foundation for you and your kids. So if you're involved in one of these situations, hit that subscribe button for new content, hit the bell notification so YouTube will actually notify you, and let's jump into today's topic. So in this video, we're going to discuss some of the critical things that you really need to consider if you're in this stage and you're trying to decide what to do. There's a common theme that runs through everyone's mind when they're trying to decide what to do with their relationship, when they're struggling with what's going on. I'm sure you guys have all heard that comment, and it's one of those things where when you're really at the beginning stages of this and you're trying to rationalize what's going on, you're going to probably ask yourself, well, what is the right move? And I get it. I understand the question. I went through the same thing myself, and I asked myself the same question, trying to decide what was the right course of action heading forward. Now, part of the reason I brought this up is this has come up in a comment in the last few days, and it's one of those things where I understand that you kind of get in this mode, but there are some critical pitfalls that you need to think of before you finally make that decision. There's two fundamental questions whenever you're trying to address this issue, and that is, what's the emotional cost and what's the financial cost? Now, a lot of times whenever you're looking at this, you don't necessarily think about the emotional cost because you're already in the middle of it, you're already dealing with it, and it's kind of your normal, not stable, but it's your normal situation. So when you're in a relationship with a toxic person or somebody with a personality disorder or somebody that you just really don't click with anymore, there is an emotional cost. And that emotional cost can basically take years off your life, and your quality of life is going to basically go in the tank. The problem is when you're in a toxic environment, you will never get your emotional needs met. It doesn't matter what you do, the other person is incapable of doing it. If you're married with somebody who has an actual personality disorder, they are incapable of change. So no matter what you do or what you try, it's never going to be good enough. Now, I'm not saying that you should just discard everything and not try to fix your marriage. You have to make sure that you really understand what your relationship is and what the situation is, so you're making an informed decision. But you also need to understand that if you're dealing in a situation where it's just day in and day out, it's the same thing, and maybe you have tried to have conversations to try to make things better and nothing seems to work, you need to understand that no matter what you do, it's not going to change. So you're going to have to make a decision on the emotional cost of it. Is it worth it to ultimately stay in that relationship forever with no chance of change and still a high risk that at any point your spouse could turn around and decide to basically discard you and take everything they can get and run? Okay, so now we're going to jump into the financial cost. Everybody knows divorce is expensive. It's a complete nightmare. You're going to more than likely, especially unless it's amicable and you can discuss things and figure things out on your own, which typically doesn't happen. And if you're in a toxic environment, you can guarantee that they are not going to cooperate because there's no incentive for them to do that. If you have children, it makes it even worse because now you have child support, and you have a constant connection to your ex that's going to technically it's going to last forever, but during that period of time, whenever your case is basically under the mandate of family court and under enforcement for child support under family court, your ex is going to have a significant amount of control. All right, so let's jump into some of the hard realities of divorce and the financial cost. If you have been in a marriage that's typically over 10 years in most places, that's considered a long-term marriage. Now, the problem with a long-term marriage is that changes the dynamic of what the family court system is going to basically ultimately decide and how long. Now, the critical difference on that for long-term support is effectively that means that alimony and spousal support will be forever. I know it sounds crazy, but if you've been married 10 years, there's a high probability that your ex will be able to argue the point that it's a long-term marriage and they are entitled to basically a support payment for the rest of their life until they pass away or until they get married. Now, as I go on to this, I'm going to talk about a significant caveat with this that you really need to think about whenever you're trying to determine your time frame, but we'll get that into a minute. Okay, so back to the harsh reality. You understand that you're going to lose pretty much half of everything, if not more. If you have a retirement pension, they're more than likely going to get a percentage of that. If you've been married the entire time that you worked at a company for a pension, they're going to get half of it. If you've been saving in a retirement savings account, they're going to get half of it. If you have any assets, houses, or property, they're going to get half of that as well. Now, as it progresses, depending on how aggressive you are at fighting, it could actually even be more than half because they're going to try to get everything they possibly can. Now, if you're lucky enough to where you have an opportunity to offset the retirement and pensions, and you can say, look, here's a buyout, that's an opportunity. Just understand that if your ex is not reasonable and they're trying to get everything they possibly can, they have a significant advantage in family court to basically do that. Okay, so now this jumps into the I should wait, right? It's you have the comment of it's cheaper to keep her, so I'll just stay. Or you have people who say, well, you know what, for the good of the kids, I'm going to stay until they're adults. I have a few more years, I'll wait till they're 18, and then once the kids are out of the house, I'll do it. Here's the problem with that, and I didn't understand this until I went through it. And if you've watched some of my other videos, I have talked about this, but I had a buddy of mine where we were going through a divorce at the same time. My kids were younger, his were older. His divorce finished after they were all adults. And here is the nightmare scenario that I didn't realize when I was going through it. So I'm very fortunate in my situation that things happened when it did. Because his kids were adults and there was no child support to be awarded, all of that money, all the money that he made was basically reallocated for spousal support. So at the end of the day, when we both basically were at a pause point in our divorces, or, our divorces were basically final, our payments were relatively the same. The difference is that, a small percentage of my payments were spousal support and all of his was spousal support. And we're talking about a chunk of change. It was probably, for both of us, about 46% of our take-home pay was given to the other person. Now, for me, as the kids drop off, those numbers automatically go down. For him, he's going to have to go back to court and try to fight to say that number wasn't right, or that the situation has changed. Personally, he is going to have to hire an attorney, pay for the cost to do that, which isn't going to be cheap. And there's no guarantee that a judge is ultimately going to say, you know what, that was too much money. She doesn't need it, and roll it down. Now, keep in mind, his ex wasn't a stay-at-home mom. She had a degree in accounting. Now, she wasn't working at the time, and she didn't get a job during the divorce because more than likely someone told her that it wasn't in her advantage to do that. And now she's able to work. She's able to bring in extra money, not that she necessarily needs it with the amount of money that she's making, and he's on the hook for that. So if you're in the situation where your kids are, late teens or, early teens, and you're thinking, you know what, it might just be better to wait until not the divorce, but wait until they are adults. Guys, I'm telling you, it's a dangerous game to play, because then you're dealing with a situation where all that money would be spousal support instead of child support. Now, I'll tell you, when my buddy first told me the number that he was paying, my jaw hit the floor. The thing with that is I figured that his alimony payment would be like my alimony payment, and it wasn't. Like I said, he was technically paying a little bit more than I was total. All right, so here's the thing. You got to plan your escape, and you got to really determine what you want to do. And there's nothing wrong with waiting and, basically having a long-term plan on this, but you need to understand the consequences of waiting too long, as in waiting until all your kids are over 18 and are adults, or waiting until you've been married over 10 years. If you're right at that, before that 10-year mark, you are in a much better situation to just bite the bullet and deal with it, because then typically in a non-long-term marriage, it'll be half the time of the marriage. So if you were married 8 years, 4 years, and you're done with alimony. My situation, I'm at rolling up on 6. I'm still on tap to pay basically forever. Even, there is no stopping in my court order. I will have to go back to court and try to argue the point that number needs to change because of some significant reason. My worry is that I'm not going to have a valid argument if everything's the same. And the double whammy on that is when I ultimately retire, until I go back and have that number reduced, I'm going to still owe her part of my pension, and I'm still on hook for alimony. So you need to think about the consequences of what happens when you wait and what that ultimate number is going to be. So in planning your escape, you absolutely need to chat with an attorney, do a free, if they do free consults, do that, or pay them to really get an idea of what the situation is in your area and in your environment. Okay, if you can plan, try to do everything in your power to make sure things are as even as possible. And what I'm saying is you want to make sure that your kids are in school, that they're in daycare, that hopefully both parents are working. You don't want to be in a situation where you have a primary care, you're the working person, the other parent is the primary caregiver, and they're young and that's all they've known. Because when you go into court, you're going to be fighting for custody and time, and then you're going to have this question of, well, can you actually take care of it? A lot of people have recommended just staying in the family home until it is until the divorce and custody is finalized. That's a great idea. Just be careful if you're dealing with a toxic person. They can do things to try to get a domestic violence thing going and potentially get you thrown in jail to accomplish the same thing. Be mindful of your situation and make good decisions so you don't torpedo yourself. But if you can stay in the family house until things are settled, that could potentially help you. You don't want to be in a situation where you're homeschooling your kids and the other parent is the teacher and the primary caregiver, because then you're stuck in a situation of why in the world would you need more time when they're going to be with the other parent anyways. That is absolutely going to end up in court, and they're going to try to use that to demonstrate that you don't really spend a lot of time with the kids anyways, so you don't necessarily need to be, need to have them more, because it's not what they're used to. And finally on this, do not act on emotions. Like I mentioned earlier, I fell into that trap, but try to be methodical about this and try to have a tactical view, because every decision you make going forward is going to be critical and basically how your divorce is going to potentially go, how your separation is going to go, how custody is going to go, how finances are going to go. And if you make emotional decisions, you react emotionally, it puts you at a significant disadvantage because you're not necessarily really paying attention and you're going to make mistakes. Okay, nobody can really tell you what the right answer is for you. And I get that. And I understand the struggle of, you have time and emotions and everything invested in, and you have a life. You have a life invested with this other person. So making the decision to either stay or leave is really complicated. Actually, staying is easy because it's what you're already doing. And you may need, before you give up on the marriage, to go through steps to try to see if it can be salvaged. There are times where these situations aren't necessarily toxic. It's just communications drop down and your relationship's falling apart. But there's things you can do to try to fix that. You can do marriage counseling. You can try, increasing your communication. I even tried reading different books. I found some different books and tried to get the ex to do it. The key difference on this is watch what your ex is doing and not necessarily what they're saying. If they're saying the marriage is important or that they care about you, but they're not doing anything to demonstrate it, the actions are really critical. The actions are what really determine what in the world is real in your relationship. And listen and watch and pay attention. And like I said, do not jump into this situation with emotion. And I say that as I've already mentioned that I fell into that trap, but your decision going forward is going to be significant no matter what you decide to do. So don't make an emotional decision. Don't get frustrated, or whenever that mask falls or the fog lifts and you realize a nightmare that you've been living and that it's all been an illusion, take a breath, slow down, be methodical about what you're thinking about, and make good decisions for yourself and basically for your kids so that you don't torpedo your entire future. Understand that if you wait until your kids are adults, it can destroy your financial future. That money is going to just turn into spousal support money. And you might think, okay, well, the kids will be done. It'll be cleaner. In some ways it is cleaner because you're not going to have a custody battle. But the problem is you could turn around and have a situation to where you owe them 40 to 50% of your take-home pay for the rest of your life because you don't have kids or you don't have child support to basically offset that. And lastly, if you decide to stay in your situation, if you decide to stay with your spouse, you need to understand that at any time they can turn around and leave you. So that financial benefit that you think you're having by staying, they can turn around and plan. They can do the same thing. They can turn around and plan the most opportune time to basically wait until the kids are done, get the most in spousal support, and leave you anyways. So you really need to understand that you're not necessarily dodging a bullet because you could ultimately get hit with that at the end if they decide that it's their time to leave. All right, I know that this is a really tough subject, and I know, especially since I've gotten some messages on this recently, that people are struggling with this. If you want to add to the discussion and your thoughts and maybe your experiences of how the situation has worked or not worked for you, leave that in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like this channel, please subscribe and hit the bell notification so YouTube will actually tell you about the videos coming out. And if you haven't had a chance to go over to the Dad Surviving Divorce website and sign up for the newsletter, please run on over and do that. And I will chat with you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye.